Hello, I'm Jeff M. Brown, legal writer with the State Bar of Wisconsin. I am here today with Kristen McGowan to discuss firearm identification evidence. That topic is one of many that will be discussed at the State Bar's second annual Forensic Justice Institute, which will be held virtually on January 19 and 20. Kristen is with the Center for Integrity in Forensic Sciences. She has her Ph.D. in the psychology of law. Welcome, Kristen.
Hi, thanks, Jeff. Great to be here with you.
And you mentioned an interesting term there, adversarial alliance, and it's fairly intuitive what that means when you think about it. It seems fairly intuitive. That's an example, I suspect, of psychology on the lawyer side or the evidence presenter side of things.
Mhm.
Your PhD is in the psychology of law, and you mentioned when we were talking before the recording that you study how jurors perceive evidence. So can you talk a little bit about how firearms evidence plays a role in how the evidence presentees are looking at it psychologically?
Yeah, I think jurors sometimes are purposely not selected if they know a lot about science. So that's where a lot of times talking about laypersons who aren't going to be able to pick up a lot on some of the more technicalities of what's being presented. So they will maybe rely a little bit more on just aspects of what's being presented. And they're going to pick up on mannerisms, confidence, things like that. That confidence isn't necessarily always a good indicator of the accuracy, but for a juror, that might still come into play just because they kind of rely on different cues sometimes because of they're not trained always in the science itself, so they don't know as much about it from that stance.
Right. So perhaps a lawyer on either side may use a challenge to strike a engineer or a biochemist from the jury pool.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting too, in this largely secular age in which we live, science and scientists kind of have taken on some of the garb of the priesthood in centuries past, right? So we do, lay people, non-scientists, do afford a measure of that kind of priestly deference to scientists, and I can imagine that's real for jurors.
Yeah, and I think they already have, like we were saying, like with the CSI effect, they do think that science, if they're presented with science in a courtroom, they're usually going to just assume that it's accurate. I think that's changing a little bit now with all the wrongful convictions that have been coming out, luckily, but it hasn't always been that way. And I think there is still that expectation that what's being presented to them is going to be objective